A major legal fight is unfolding, one that could redefine the boundaries of presidential authority and reshape the landscape of international trade. This isn't just another legal skirmish, it's a fundamental challenge to the balance of power within the U.S. government. At the heart of the matter is a debate over the powers of the American presidency, specifically, how far those powers extend in matters of national security and economic policy. The question is, can a president act unilaterally on issues with broad economic consequences? The controversy is centered on billions of dollars in tariffs imposed by former President Trump during his time in office. These tariffs, implemented under the premise of national security, have become the focal point of a complex legal battle. These tariffs, essentially taxes on imported goods, affected a wide range of industries and trading partners. They were designed to protect American industries, encourage domestic production, and address what the administration perceived as unfair trade practices. These tariffs were not just isolated measures, they were a cornerstone of former President Trump's economic policy, a key element of his America First agenda. They represented a significant departure from decades of free trade policies and sparked considerable debate among economists and policymakers. The core debate boils down to this. Does the president have the authority to unilaterally use a national emergency law to set sweeping tariffs that impact the entire economy? This question strikes at the heart of the separation of powers. Businesses and trade organizations argue that President Trump overstepped his authority, causing significant disruption to supply chains and increasing costs for consumers. They contend that the tariffs were implemented without proper justification. These groups argue that the president used a law meant for specific targeted crises to enact broad trade policies that traditionally fall under Congress's purview. They believe that trade policy should be debated and legislated by the legislative branch, not dictated by executive action. Legal experts and critics warn that this sets a dangerous precedent, potentially allowing future presidents to wield unchecked power over the economy. The fear is that this could lead to economic instability and undermine the principles of free trade. They argue that allowing a president to bypass Congress on major economic decisions could fundamentally alter the balance of power, giving the executive branch unprecedented control over trade and economic policy. This could have long-lasting consequences for the American economy and its relationship with the rest of the world. The courts must now interpret a decades-old law, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and determine its scope and limitations in the context of modern trade disputes. This requires a careful examination of the law's original intent and its potential implications for the future. Ultimately, the courts must decide where presidential emergency powers end and congressional authority begins, drawing a clear line to prevent future abuses of power. This decision will have a profound impact on the structure of American government and the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches. The case began with the implementation of aggressive tariffs on goods imported from key trading partners, a move that sparked immediate controversy and legal challenges. These tariffs were not limited to a single country or industry. They affected a wide range of goods and sectors. China, Mexico, and Canada justified under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, a law designed to address genuine national emergencies, not broad trade disputes. The invocation of IEEPA in this context raised serious questions about the law's intended purpose. Critics argue that using IEEPA as justification for broad tariffs is a significant overreach of presidential power, stretching the definition of national emergency beyond its original intent. They believe that this sets a dangerous precedent for future administrations. Many legal scholars view using IEEPA in this way is a legally questionable stretch, arguing that it undermines the checks and balances inherent in the U.S. system of government. The legal arguments are complex and nuanced, with both sides presenting compelling cases. A lower court has already dealt a blow to the tariff plan, ruling against the administration's interpretation of IEEPA and raising serious doubts about the legality of the tariffs. This ruling was a significant victory for businesses and trade organizations challenging the tariffs. However, the case is currently under appeal, and the tariffs remain in effect, continuing to impact businesses and consumers across the country. The ongoing uncertainty surrounding the tariffs has created significant challenges for businesses engaged in international trade. The Supreme Court may ultimately decide this landmark case, setting a precedent that will shape the relationship between the executive and legislative branches for decades to come. The stakes are incredibly high, with potentially far-reaching consequences for the American economy and its role in the global trading system. This historic clash over presidential power, international trade, and the rule of law could redefine the very fabric of American governance. The decision will have lasting implications for the balance of power in Washington and the future of U.S. trade policy. The first major turning point came in May, when a federal court ruled against the tariff plan. The Court of International Trade declared the president exceeded his legal authority by using IEEPA for sweeping tariffs. The judge found IEEPA was meant for targeted actions, not a global tariff regime. By taxing goods from major trading partners, the president entered territory reserved for Congress. The court said there wasn't a sufficient link between the declared emergency and the broad economic remedy of tariffs. This landmark decision signaled the judiciary would enforce limits on presidential emergency powers. While the ruling is paused pending appeal, its reasoning now frames the entire legal debate. At the center of this complex legal dispute, a law passed decades ago is now being scrutinized. It's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, often referred to as IEEPA. This act grants significant authority to the executive branch. Passed in 1977 amidst a different geopolitical landscape, IEEPA was designed to let the president respond quickly and decisively to unusual and extraordinary foreign threats. It was intended as a tool for national security. It does this primarily by regulating a wide range of economic transactions that involve foreign entities or interests. The law provides mechanisms for blocking assets held within U.S. jurisdiction, effectively freezing them. Historically, IEEPA has been used to freeze assets belonging to individuals, organizations, or even governments deemed to be a threat. It's also been a key tool to sanction specific entities that engage in activities contrary to U.S. foreign policy objectives. However, the current debate centers on whether IEEPA can be used to impose broad tariffs, a measure that affects the entire economy. The original text of the law doesn't explicitly mention tariffs as a permissible action under its authority. This absence is a key point of contention in the current legal battle, as opponents argue that tariffs are a misuse of the law. Critics argue that using IEEPA for general economic protectionism through the imposition of tariffs fundamentally ignores its intended limits and scope, as defined by Congress. They contend that such an interpretation effectively gives the president a blank check to regulate trade without explicit congressional approval. Courts are now carefully examining the law's legislative history and the original text to determine whether Congress ever envisioned or intended IEEPA to be used in this manner, particularly for broad economic measures like tariffs. The lower court has already weighed in, siding with those who oppose the use of IEEPA in this way, ruling that this particular application of IEEPA stretches the law far beyond its original and intended purpose. The ultimate outcome of this legal challenge will undoubtedly set a significant precedent, shaping the scope of presidential power in trade, and potentially impacting the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches for years to come. Despite the lower court's ruling, the tariffs are still in effect. The government appealed, so the policies remain during the legal process. The case is now before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. Both sides have submitted arguments, and the appeals court is reviewing the lower court's decision. The process is slow, leaving businesses in limbo, still paying tariffs and facing uncertainty. Oral arguments took place in July, but no ruling has been issued. Until the appeals process ends, and possibly until the Supreme Court weighs in, the tariffs remain law. For businesses and consumers, the economic impact continues daily. At the July appeals hearing, judges showed deep skepticism about the legal basis for the tariffs. They focused on IEEPA's history, noting it was never used to justify global tariffs. One judge remarked that if Congress intended to give the president such power, it would have said so explicitly. The government argued modern threats require broad authority, but judges questioned how tariffs on unrelated goods address specific emergencies. 10 of 11 judges reportedly doubted the government's position. Legal analysts predict the appeals court will likely rule against the tariffs. Such a decision would almost certainly send the case to the Supreme Court. In response, former President Trump warned that striking down the tariffs would trigger another Great Depression. He claims the government would owe massive refunds, over $100 billion, to importers, devastating the Treasury. Trump frames the legal battle as a defense of economic stability, warning of catastrophic consequences if he loses. He argues the tariffs protect American industries and jobs. However, most economists disagree with his dire prediction. They say a $100 billion refund, while significant, wouldn't collapse the U.S. economy. The contrast between political rhetoric and expert analysis is stark. Most economists believe eliminating the tariffs would benefit the U.S. economy. Tariffs are a tax on businesses and consumers. Removing them would lower costs and ease inflation. A court-ordered refund could act as economic stimulus, giving companies cash to invest and hire. Investment banks predict the tariffs will be defeated at the Supreme Court, viewing this as positive for business. Some warn that domestic industries protected by tariffs like steel could face renewed competition and job losses. Still, the consensus is that the benefits of lower prices and stimulus outweigh these negatives. The likely outcome is not depression, but economic adjustment and growth. Wall Street is already pricing in the possibility of the tariffs' end. The legal journey of this case is far from over. The Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, hasn't yet decided to take up the case. For now, they are letting the appeals process play out, allowing the lower courts to weigh in and further refine the legal arguments. This is a crucial step in ensuring a thorough and considered judicial review. The next key event to watch for is the Federal Circuit's ruling. This court will carefully examine the previous decision and the legal reasoning behind it. Legal experts anticipate that the Federal Circuit is expected to uphold the lower court's decision, reinforcing the initial judgment. This would further solidify the legal foundation of the case. If that happens and the Federal Circuit affirms the lower court, the government will very likely appeal to the Supreme Court, seeking a final determination on the matter. Given the case's significant constitutional implications and its far-reaching economic stakes, impacting businesses and consumers alike, legal analysts widely expect the justices to take it up and address these critical questions. The Supreme Court's involvement would bring clarity and finality to the dispute. However, a final decision from the Supreme Court may not come until 2026, as the court's schedule and deliberation process can be lengthy. This means that the tariffs in question are likely to remain in effect until then, continuing to influence international trade and economic relationships. At the heart of this legal battle lies a central question. Did the president exceed the scope of his authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, by imposing these broad tariffs? This is the core legal issue under scrutiny. The answer to this question will set a powerful precedent, shaping the boundaries of presidential power in matters of trade and national security. This precedent will have lasting implications for both presidential power and the future of international trade relations. As the nation, and indeed the world, waits with bated breath, this slow-moving yet incredibly significant legal battle will ultimately shape American law and jurisprudence for decades to come. It will also redefine the scope and limitations of the presidency for years to come, impacting the balance of power within the government.